This song is based on an interesting midrash that, as you can see in the English translation, that claims that Avram's mother kept her pregnancy secret because she felt that what she was carrying was a precious child that already was threatened, that people wanted to kill her because of the child that she was carrying in her womb. And so she kept the pregnancy secret. Avram, before his birth, was already a threat to the status quo of the king, of the kingdom, and of idolatry. So, an interesting midrash. Felicia and I looked for it a few years ago, and it's there. So this song is based on that midrash. So Parashat Lech Lecha, sometimes we have the impression when we read this Torah portion that this call, Lech Lecha, go forth, to Abraham from God, comes out of the blue. And yet the story begins before Parashat Lech Lecha, at the end of Parashat Noach, on page 61. I'd like you to turn to page 61 in the Chumash, because that's really where the story begins. If you look at page 61, we come to the end of the 10 generations that come after Noah. As Noah emerges from the ark, and he and his family begin to build humanity again, these 10 generations land. For each generation, it says this person lived such and such a number of years, such a person, such a man had these children, and then died, and then the next generation. And here we come to Terach, on verse 26. When Terach had lived 70 years, he began Avram, Nahor, and Haran. Typical formula. And here the Torah departs. Now, this is the line of Terach. Terach begat Avraham, Nahor, and Haran. So 3 brothers, Avram, Nahor, and Haran began Lot. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach, in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Avram and Nahor took to themselves wives. Now the 2 brothers who are left of the 3, they marry, the name of Avram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. And then the Torah tells us now, Vatehi Sarai akara en la valad. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avram, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. So you can see the story begins with this family that experiences a great trauma, the death of a child. Avram's brother and Nahor's brother Haran, son of Terach, dies. So this is the first trauma. The second trauma is that Avram and Sarai are a couple that can't have children. Vatehi Sarai akara in la valad. Sarai tries to give birth. She can't give birth. She's sterile. And she can't give birth. And so this trauma somehow pushes this family to get out. They get out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. And so they are on their journey. And when they came as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terach came to 205 years, and Terach died in Haran. So this is a family that experiences death and sterility, and it's a family that is in motion, that is displaced. And the word akara, the Sarai, it says here, ותהי שרי עקרה. Sarai was akara is an interesting word because Aviva Zornberg has this profound insight. The word akara means barren. It also means uprooted. La'akor means to uproot. So she's the family, Avram and Sarai akarim. They are barren, sterile. They're also uprooted in the same word. And this is the experience of this family. Aviva Zornberg says, Avram and Sarah are akarim. They recognize the sterility of the place that nurtured them. They grew up there in Ur. But the place is sterile. There's something that doesn't give fruit, doesn't produce. They recognize the sterility of the place that nurtured them. In the full tension of that paradox, the place that nurtured them, but for them, it's a place that is sterile. They exile themselves to place after place and encounter new possibilities of being. Place after place? How do we know? The Ramban says that Avram and Sarah wandered and went about from nation to nation, from kingdom to another people, until they came to Canaan, where God said, to your descendants I will give this land. In other words, they were in motion. How do we know that they were in motion? They didn't just go from one place to the next and they settled there. They were in motion. How do we know? Because later, in a few chapters, in chapter 20th, Abraham will say, Vayehi kasher it'u oti Elohim mi beit avi. When God made me wander from my father's house. Rashi says, what does it mean? It means when the Holy One brought me forth from my father's house to be a nomad, wandering from place to place. This is a family. This is an Avram and a Sarah and a family that is wandering around, that is a nomadic family. And where do they go? Where do they go? They go, Vayomer Adonai el Avram, Lech lecha me'artzecha. This is the beginning of our Torah portion this week. Lech lecha me'artzecha, go from your land. Umimoladetecha, from your birthplace. Umiveit abicha, and from your father's house. El haaretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. Where do they go? Leave everything that is familiar, all your attachments, and go. Where? El haaretz asher areka, to the land that I will show you. God doesn't tell them where to go. It's indeterminate. Just go. Just go. Indeterminate. So they're wandering around and then God tells them, go to the place that I will show you. There is no clear destination. And you look at the words Lech Lecha. It doesn't say Lech. Of course, many commentators have noted this and commented on the word Lecha. Why is the word Lecha? Lech Lecha, go yourself. Rashi says, for your own benefit. Lecha. Lech Lecha, for you, for your own benefit, for your own good. Because there, in that place where I'm taking you, I will make of you a great nation. While here, where you're presently, you will not merit the privilege of having children. Furthermore, I shall make known your character throughout the world. You'll become famous. God promises Avraham and Sarah children, wealth, and a great name. That's why they go. That's why they go. They go because in the place where they were originally, it's a place of death and sterility. It doesn't produce anything. And so they have to go to a new place of opportunity, of possibility, of blessing, material blessing, and also spiritual blessing. The Zohar says, Lech lecha, lecha, go for your sake to transform yourself, to create yourself anew, to have a new opportunity. In this new place, there's promise, there's aspiration, and there's fundamental transformation. there's a radical shift that is going to happen in their lives once they get to this place. And see what happens. Lech Lecha begins on page 69, right? So look at page 69. Turn a page, and then turn another page. Go to page 72. And Abraham is in motion in the land of Canaan. Verse 7, verse 8, verse 9. He's in motion. And he settles in some place, and then he moves to another place, and then to another place, and then no sooner. Verse 10. There was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there. No sooner they get there. This is the place of all the promise. They get there, there's a famine in the land, they have to leave. They have to pick up and leave. Just as they got there, you see, just 2 pages. We just turned 2 pages. And they have to leave. And they go to Mitzrayim. So they are really wanderers. But Abraham and Sarah are not the first wanderers. Neither is Abraham's father Terach. The first wanderer is Cain. After Cain murders Abel, his brother Abel, God punishes Cain and says, Na vanad tiye ba'aretz. You shall become a ceaseless wanderer on the face of the earth. But unlike Cain, Abraham and Sarah are not wandering as punishment for a crime. They are wandering as an opportunity to leave death and sterility behind for the sake of a better life. That's why Lech Lecha resonates with us so deeply. Leaving death and sterility behind for the sake of a better life. That's why we're so fascinated, attracted to the story. Each time we read it, it touches something in us, because there isn't one person here who somewhere in the chain of their family story, they don't have this. One generation, one ancestor, or maybe 2 or maybe more. A grandparent, a great-grandparent, a great-great-grandparent who picked up and left because of death and sterility, wherever it was, in Europe, in the Middle East, in North Africa, or even in this country. People who had to pick up and leave because of death and sterility in their place of origin. And they had to move. And so we all have this in our story somewhere. And so we read this and it touches something. But more than that, we all have this in our personal story because we are all wanderers in our most basic essence. The Torah highlights wandering and journeying as the fundamental human condition. It's not a curse. It's not a punishment. It was for Cain. But for most of humanity, it's not a curse or a punishment. It's an essential part of what it means to be human. Wandering never stops. Even if you were born here and you lived here all of your life, as some of you have, wandering never stops. We never arrive. There's always a new place, a new challenge, a new struggle. Abraham dies at a good, ripe age, old and content, the Torah tells us. You would think this means once he arrived in the land of Canaan, after he went to Mitzrayim, he went back to the land of Canaan, he settled there and was a happy man. But his life was one of constant motion, a life of test after test. And our wandering also never stops. We may get to a place, please God, and good, ripe age. We hope all for that, to be old and content. But our wandering, it doesn't mean that we don't wander. It means that we wander, that we face challenges and tests, one after the other. And our wandering never stops. Physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, we're constantly wandering, constantly changing, moving, adjusting, readjusting to new realities, to new environments, to new technologies. Sounds familiar? To new ideas. We're never, ever given to rest, except we have this gift called Shabbat. So we can stop 1/7 of the time and take a breath. And Shabbat ends this evening at 6:30, and the wandering begins again for another 6 days. We think we are settled in our homes, in our cities, in our lives. We think we're settled in our assumptions about how things are, how things will be. We think we're settled in our ideas, our financial security for those of us who have it. But the truth is that we don't. We're not settled. Everything changes. Everything is in motion. Everything can change in an instant. One day you're up, the next day you can be down. One day you're down, one day you can be up. Everything changes, and everything changes sometimes in an instant. And we know this about COVID, how everything changed in one instant. One tiny virus threw the entire world out on a spin. Is that the expression? For a spin, on a spin? I don't know. I'm not from here. One day I'll learn. So this Parashat Lech Lecha, which marks the beginning of our faith and our people with Abraham and Sarah, shed some light about that essential fact, that fundamental reality of our existence. We are wanderers and the journey never stops. So what does it mean to live with that awareness? What does awareness generate in us when you realize that we're constantly wandering? That's part of our human condition. That we're not settled beings, we're nomads. And in turn, this connects with and sheds some light on a raging debate that exists in our society, particularly here and in Europe, about those who wander not metaphorically or figuratively or existentially, but the 100 million people in the world today who wander because they were forced to flee death and sterility in their homes. Migrants, refugees, asylum seekers who had to uproot themselves and leave their homes and everything that is familiar to escape death and sterility. Violence and war, persecution, gang violence, political and economical turmoil, droughts, floods, and other consequences of natural disasters and climate change, in order to give themselves and their descendants a chance to survive and perhaps even to succeed at a decent and dignified life. They want the same we want. They aspire to what we aspire. They want safety, they want freedom, they want a measure of financial security, they want a home, they want health, they want education. Many years ago, I was in El Salvador with 4 colleagues, Rabbi Rachel Cowan, blessed memory, Marcelo, Nancy Flam, and Josh Saltzman, 5 rabbis. We went through AJWS to visit a very poor town that was in a zone that had been devastated by the civil war and was rebuilding. And they had people who were from both sides of the conflict now living together and trying to make peace and build. And we stayed in this very, very humble home. They had a dust floor, latrines outside, the kitchen outside. We slept on hammocks. And in the morning, I was talking to the child, one of the children in the family in the morning. He was, I think, 7 or 8 years old. I was talking to him, and I saw that the children outside, they were going to school. And I said, "Are you not going to school?" He says, "No, once every couple of weeks, my teacher goes for teacher training, and we have the day off." I said, "How is your teacher?" He says, "I love my teacher." I said, "When you grow up, would you like to be a teacher?" He says, "No." I said, would you like to be a farmer? He said, no. I said, what would you like to do? I said, I would like to go to the States, like my uncle. What? He says, yes, my uncle, my father's brother. He picked up when he was 17 years old. And he is in the States. Where does he live? He says, I don't know, but I want to be like him. Thousands of people are like this child. They grew up, they want to be a teacher. They don't want to be a farmer. They want to pick up and leave for better lives. Because that's what they imagine they're going to find here. And we have thousands upon thousands who got now to New York City on buses. We're trying to help them. Felicia announced this last night. And this is an important Torah I learned from my friend Rabbi Roly Matalon, who spoke here a couple of weeks ago. This is his Torah. If we can't accept the reality that we're in constant motion ourselves, internally wandering, and that as a consequence, somewhere inside we feel insecure, afraid, enraged, depressed, ashamed, if we can't own that or process that, and we can't tolerate the insecurity, the fear, the rage, the shame, we project it onto others, into obvious and overt wanderers, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and we blame them and demonize them because of something we're feeling inside. There are plenty of such anti-immigration people around here, in our country, here and in Europe. Who have no empathy, feel no solidarity, no responsibility for the plight of refugees, fleeing deprivation and violence, death and sterility in their own countries. Why open the door to them and spend money on these people? Our country should spend our tax dollars on its own citizens. And they rationalize. Most of them are criminals. They want to take our jobs. They'll destroy our culture, our language, our way of life. They'll replace us, etc. That's one side of the debate. But on the other hand, the Slovenian thinker Slavoj Žižek says, to really love the stranger, as we claim, those of us who are liberal, and to really love our neighbor in distress, it is not enough to give him the crumbs of our own rich table, but rather to abolish the very circumstances that are causing their distress. And so we are caught. We want them, these refugees and immigrants, to have a safe place to come. We're not willing to do enough, invest enough in changing the conditions in their countries. Some say, if you say you want to change the condition in their country, it is some sort of a subtle way of saying you don't want them here. But the truth is, when they come here, we can't do enough for them to have a dignified life. And so they end up in homeless shelters and with handout, putting their hand out to receive a little bit of help. Nobody wants to change radically what is actually needed to change in terms of the conditions of the places where they come from, because nobody wants to upset the status quo of our capitalist order. That's the truth. And so we're caught in this argument. Those of us on the left or the center left or liberals, and those on the right and anti-immigrants. And unless we start seeing ourselves, all of us, on all sides of this debate, as the permanent wanderers that we are, living with all the insecurities, all aspiring to live, all aspiring to live and leave behind everything that symbolizes death and sterility. Unless we are able to understand this, and to understand it through this story of Abraham and Sarah, their motivation for living and God's promise to them, unless we are willing to understand that, then I think we're not going to really understand ourselves and who we are in our essence in a very, very deep level, and understand one of the most intractable challenges of our time. There's 100 million people in motion now. And there will be many more. Shabbat Shalom.